And I'm excited to speak with Dr. Richard Schuster today, who has a master's degree in social work. He also has a master's degree in clinical psychology and a doctorate of clinical psychology. And he conducts forensic, oh my gosh, I knew I was going to mess up at least one word in that bio. He conducts forensic and neuropsychological assessments. He also hosts the Daily Helping podcast, which is how he and I met. So we're going to talk about this line today, this line between where brands end and people begin, how people identify with brands, and how do we identify with each other. We'll be right back after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say, I know it started, but I didn't know where it was going to end. One of my favorite things about live shows is how all of the pieces work together and when they, when they're working and when they're not, just like when brands are working and when they're not, right, Dr. Richard?
Absolutely.
I'm so glad you're part of our show today and that you are live streaming. This is our second show live streaming. And we're program 88 today. So we've had a lot of shows and we're adding this new dimension of technology to see what comes. And I know being the host of a podcast, you've got some things like this that happen on your side. Tell us about something like that you're working with right now with your podcast.
Well, the podcast, we haven't done live video yet, although I think we're working in that direction. And thus far, my experience here on Bold Business Radio has not dissuaded me from that, Jess. So kudos to you for that and your team behind the scenes for sure. One of the things that I run into, which is wild, is that you never actually know, what's going to impact the recordings you're doing, and sometimes, like, I literally have had to reschedule several because of this hurricane, kids getting sick. There's always these things that come up, and sometimes, as you know, because we just kind of let the conversations flow, is that sometimes things will come out of a guest's mouth that, like, oh my God, we can't say that on the air. so that sometimes happens, and we just roll with it. But it is, I think these things are more genuine when we just let them roll and we're not just reading 500 questions necessarily. I once heard Larry David talking about Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is perhaps the greatest comedy in the history of mankind. And basically for all of these shows, they have just a very vague semblance of what the plot's going to be. And then people just roll with it. So I've tried to adopt a bit of that on my show as well, without the neuroticism that Larry David brings to the forefront.
Yeah, well, I'll just tease it right here. I have an upcoming podcast with you, don't I, Dr. Richard?
You sure do.
And in it, I was making a comparison, and I'm not going to tell you what the comparison was, but when he restated what I was talking about, I was laughing so hard because it was really true and it was unexpected, and at least it was clean.
Yes, it was very clean. It's funny, iTunes now makes us put a little tick box if our lyrics are explicit or not, as you know. So I'm delighted that your show has clean lyrics and can be shared with children of all ages.
Yes, you never know. Entrepreneurship and business ownership can come at any age, I have to admit. And so we have to be thinking about what that brand is, how we're showing up to face the world. And I guess the first thing I want to, hear from you, and I know our audience would be very interested in knowing, is, are you your brand? Is your brand separate from you? And what made you decide, either way, what made you decide that?
You're asking me personally.
You personally, for you and the Daily Helping podcast. Yeah.
So for me personally, I am my brand. And really what happened for me, and I'll be very brief with this because I know there's station breaks and all these things that we have to do, is that I did have a corporate background. I worked as an IT consultant for a number of years before starting my own consulting practice. And what ended up happening was, along the way, as I was developing that, I was nearly killed in a car accident. In fact, this is something that I've talked about openly and regularly on other people's shows. And I even have it on my website, the story and pictures of the crash, because it was really the pivotal moment for me. Whereas prior to this accident, my focus was very much on things that didn't really matter, boats and cars and all of this stuff. And again, like, if you're into boats and cars, please don't take offense to what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with liking boats and cars. I like them for the wrong reason. See, Jess likes boats and cars. I liked them for the wrong reasons, because I was interested in having things for the sake of having things. And after this car accident, upon which I broke my back, so it was not just something I scraped off the dust and walked away from him, and I had serious injuries as a result of this, was really kind of one of those life-changing moments for me. And I know that sounds very cliche, but it truly was. And though I went back to work, nothing was really ever the same for me. And so what I ended up doing was walking away, and a series of occurrences took place which put me on the current path that I'm on now. But I made the decision, and this was a commitment not only in my training en route to becoming a licensed clinical psychologist, but in everything that I was going to do, that all of my actions accomplished my life mission. And I believe my purpose on this planet, based on the talents and abilities that I'm grateful to have, are to help people become the best versions of who they are. So that's my mantra. So in everything that I'm doing, be it my clinical work, be it the podcast, my 501c3, which I'm launching in Q1 2018, everything drills back to that mission for me. So even though the podcast is called The Daily Helping, and it's not called The Dr. Richard Show or anything like that, although my name is in the subtitle, that's who I am. And so my brand, in whatever capacity that I'm going to interact with a person, is to try and help them become the best versions of themselves.
Mm-hmm. I love that you've shared that. And the biggest reason is because you've got a mission, and this is the way you are delivering this mission and giving it to the world, and creating value and connection with others, and being inspiration and support, and encouraging others to do the same through the model and the actions that you're taking. The other thing is, I'm listening to you and I'm like, how cool is this? Because I'm the other group. Voice of Bold Business is bigger than me personally. It is an extension of who I am. It is an extension of my expertise and experience. Yet I know I could not make this work without the team that works on this with me. And it's at that point in time that I open it up to other people helping me the way that I would like. There's two ways that people could help a business owner, let's say. There's the business owner that just wants people to delegates things and gets things done, and they're basically the project manager business owner. Then there's somebody like me, where sure, I'm accountable for all of that stuff, and are things getting done on time or not? And anybody who listened to Friday's show knows it happens to the best of us. Sometimes that or not is happening. It's all about, though, what values are the people on my team bringing? What ideas are the people on my team bringing to come together to make the Voice of Bold Business the most that it can be, to serve the most people possible. And we're doing the same thing. We want to serve the most people possible. And how we're looking at the brand, though, is very different. And I think it's going to be great for our conversation today to have that little bit of perspective of where you're coming from and the camp that I'm in, to introduce you to it. And our listeners may not know, I've talked about it sometimes, but I'm a very big proponent of someday when I'm done, I want the Voice of Bold Business to continue. And I planned that into the beginning. And I think yours is the same. And right now you're the face. And again, it's going to continue, because every single person that steps up to the hashtag and your movement, My Daily Helping, I shouldn't have done it that way. I should have done it this way.
Right, you got it right.
Right? I have a cup of tea in my hands.
Right.
The hashtag My Daily Helping is a movement. So it's growing person by person, and people that identify with that in their personal brands are going to incorporate it. And so it's two different ways to get to the same end goal. Both have, there's really no negative around both. It depends on what we want to do and why we want to do it. So I'm thinking about this, and this, it was really funny. So before, right? Before we started the show, we were talking about some of the things, and Scott updated us on what was going on and when we were going to start and all of that goodness. And we're online, we're live. So before we did a live radio show, live streaming, it was always podcasted. And you are really familiar with that particular model. And I'm glad you get to see the inner workings of what we're doing here, Dr. Richard. And the thing is, though, this online and offline are getting closer together. We talk about traditional marketing, we talk about digital marketing, but really there's only marketing. And it's the experience that the people that we are trying to reach and touch, it's what their experience is to what marketing means. And there's no right way to do that either. So I'm curious, from your perspective, this concept of this online and offline that are starting to merge together, how do you see the role of brand? And in your case, we'll add movement, brand or movement, change?
I think it's an interesting question, Jess. And, having spent 20 years in technology and then moving into what I'm doing now, I have a bit of perspective, I think, on both sides. One of the things that's interesting is that 20 years ago, there was very clear lines because media didn't follow us. So essentially, the news, well, sure, there was a 24-hour news cycle because things like CNN that existed then. You have to go back to the 80s to where that kind of came about. But we live in an era today where things are so different, where, 2007, Apple invented the iPhone, which changed everything in terms of how companies can connect with consumers, to be sure. But what started happening is, as you said, those lines are blurred. And I don't think the lines exist anymore, because even the big companies, anytime you go to a Facebook page, they have people who are pulling down these analytics. They know what you like. They know your shopping habits. I mean, it's almost scary. They know everything about you. So brands are able to target consumers. I guess if you are the brand, it's really exciting because you can really be very narrow and specific in your focus. But you have these mega corporations who employ tons of people whose job is nothing but to connect with you and me on social media and make us feel important and make us feel like their product or service needs to be in our lives.
Interesting. Okay, so as you were talking, this concept of generations and marketing to generations has come up, and that very much interests me. I'm a kind of anti-label. So in that sense, I'm Gen X. However, I'm very much about a posse and having people working with me on everything. So that's also very, Gen Y, millennial. And what has come up is that you've got this dichotomy of which groups of people, right? Baby boomers are possess the control of the most money in our marketplace, yet millennials are spending the most money in our marketplace. And so who's actually making the decision, and what are their drivers? Because it's really interesting. I can't remember. It was literally just yesterday. I took a long walk, and I was able to listen to several podcasts during my walk. And one of the podcasts was it was an interview, and I will look this up and get it in the show notes, because I know there will be some people that will be very interested in this, is that the millennial generation is splitting. It is such a large generation that you've got these characteristics that tend to be negative, and you either identify with those or you don't. And when you're in a generation and you are not identifying with those, with those characteristics, maybe it's entitlement, maybe it's laziness, which, by the way, turns out I'm on the cusp of being a millennial. So
you're still technically Gen X. I'm not going to say how old you are, because
I know I'm on the cusp.
But
so
you are definitely, in terms of the number and where the research says, you're still Gen X. So you can feel good.
Anyway, but I don't identify well, and it depends on which research, because the research that I was looking at and I was listening to for this particular podcast, they say 77 to like 82 is the cusp of the two generations. And so there's, regardless, millennials are splitting. They're the people who have more, have more, I don't want to say work ethic, but they identify with work ethic. And then there are other people who identify with lifestyle. And as soon as somebody picks a side, they no longer can relate to the other side. So when they hear people talking about millennials, their generation, they're like, but that's not me, but that's not me. And companies are trying to brand to this generation that has two identities. How funny is that?
You're absolutely right, Jess. And in fact, millennials are so interesting because you're right. Millennials, more than any other generation, appear to be very, I don't want to, rigid is not the right word, but entrenched in their belief systems. And so what they are probably quicker, and I have a lot of millennials that listen to my show, so I'm not dogging millennials, but they tend to be excuse me, quicker to pull people into their group and exclude people from their group than maybe a baby boomer or a Gen X would. And so what we see in a lot of millennials, those stereotypes are out there. You brought up a couple of them. Millennials are lazy. Millennials have a sense of entitlement. But what research actually shows is that a lot of millennials don't really think about the work week in the way that traditionalists and baby boomers did. It's not so much an 8 to 5 for them. It's, hey, I'm going to work 8 to 5, go grab coffee with my 3 best friends. And then when I get home, pull out my laptop while I'm binge watching on YouTube and do some extra work. So that's a difference. But what does seem to be the case across millennials is they really want to believe like the work that they're doing, they really want to believe the work that they're involved in is purpose driven, that it's environmentally sound, that it's socially responsible, more so than other generations. And that's not to say, Gen Xers, like you and I, although you're
exactly. I always have identified more with that. So anytime somebody tells me I'm a millennial, I kind of like.
Right. So, it isn't to say, I'm sorry for coughing in your ear, that the millennials, excuse me, not to say that the Gen Xers are going to be unethical or, more
right.
prone to doing things that, one shouldn't be doing. But millennials in particular are so conscious, it's not the brand name, it's what does the brand stand for. And that appears to be per the research across the board.
Yes. Truth. So we're talking about value. We're talking about, and you said it, entrenched beliefs. So this underlying set of values, this underlying set of beliefs, which may or may not be, understandable to anybody with more life experience than these people. I mean, if you think about it, every generation has it. The generation below them liked music that they didn't like, and you can't believe this stuff is changing, and on and on and on and on. So there's a big element of that. Now, when we think about brands, okay, let's talk about this concept of brand and what it stands for. The perception of people about a brand is going to influence whether or not somebody buys from that brand.
Absolutely.
Now, does that then mean, let's say, I've chosen a belief and there are companies I've decided, which is true, by the way, I'm going to try really hard not to name any names because this is not a shaming show. This is just for an example. I've decided there are companies I will not give my money to. There are companies I will go out of my way to avoid at all costs for my very own reasons. Well, what does that mean when I meet somebody on the street or at a networking event or at a charity auction or that lives next door to me that works for that brand?
Here's the problem. And it's not just indicative of millennials, although I think they experience this the most because of their habits. And by habits, I mean their technology usage. We are living in a period of time in which if I don't like your viewpoint, click, unfollow, unfriend. So and we saw this over and over during the election cycle, is that essentially, and I'm not getting political, but whatever side one person was versus the other, it was so polarizing, and society is so polarized that the openness for discussion doesn't exist, because essentially there's something called confirmation bias, which I'm hijacking our show a little bit here. But confirmation bias is essentially you're using selective information that is in line with your emotions and beliefs to make a decision. So when you, let's say, Jess, you just hate broccoli. That's a pretty benign thing. Maybe you do, I don't know.
I do not, but that's okay. We can totally pretend.
Let's go with it. Let's use our imagination. Okay. So if you dislike broccoli and you go on Facebook and you have some friends and some people that, man, broccoli is amazing, and this is a stupid analogy, but it does translate to the real world, because what ends up happening is now your entire circle, you have crafted an experience that follows you everywhere: Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and whatever else is going to come out over the next several years. Everything around you is supporting not only your position of what you like, but you have all the other broccoli haters that are right there with you. So that does apply to brand as well. And we saw this with Uber, right? Didn't Uber have all kinds of trouble? And via social media, there was, I don't even remember what exactly happened, but I remember a massive viral social media campaign, to basically end Uber. And again, I don't remember the specifics of it, so I'm not defending those against or Uber itself, but this is what's happening. So if you're a brand, you need to be cognizant of the fact that at least a large percent of your potential, I won't even say audience, potential customers are going to be very in tune with what you're all about. And now more than ever, if what you are promoting is not concordant with that, there could even be backlash. It's not just, I'm not going to buy your product. It's that people are going to become empowered and feel impassioned about preventing everybody they know from supporting that brand as well. It's very different. I mean, this was almost impossible to think about 2 decades ago.
This is the Voice of Bold Business Radio. You're listening to program 88. We're talking about personality flaws of a brand. And really, when I made this title, Dr. Richard, the personality flaws of a brand, it's interesting because I'll bet people were watching thinking, well, they'll tell me how to make the best brand and how to get it here and how to do these things. Well, guess what? That's really not what it's about. The personality flaws of a brand come right down to the people behind the brand, the choices that they're making, the actions that they're taking in their business, whether they are their brand or they're part of a brand outside of themselves, like in a larger organization, and that it's how we show up in it. And what up until right this moment in time, we've been talking about setting the stage. We've been talking about how perceptions come into play. We've been talking about things that we've seen happen just in the last 6 months that are devastating brands or bringing us closer to like-minded people, whether that's a good thing or not. Because I'm always good for a dose of sarcasm and a dose of a naysayer and other information. So we'll leave it just at that. And, it's really interesting because I think we mix this a lot. We forget our actions and our presence in the world, because you said it, there is no line anymore. And I completely agree with you there, Dr. Richard. There is no line between online and offline when it comes to our brand. So there's going to be this element and this perspective of us that other people are making and where we work and what we're doing, and do they like us and will they listen to us based off of something bigger than ourselves. So it's easy to mess up this distinction. And if we're an organization of many and we're trying to be a brand, it's or I say we're trying to be a brand, we are a brand bringing a solution of some kind into the world. Okay, so let's with that hat on. It makes what our brand stands for, what we say and what we do in alignment, much, much, much more important. So I want to know from you, Dr. Richard, when this is mixed up, what are like the symptoms that you see when companies and people who are trying to be companies, or vice versa, mix up this idea of the personality of the brand, and the brand is separate from me.
I think one of the things that becomes readily apparent and kind of ties on to what I talked about a few moments ago is that consumers are going to let you know now. In the past, consumers would let you know by not buying your product. Now they're going to let you know by telling you exactly how they feel in social media. So I would say, as a brand, as a company, number one, it's got to start top-down leadership. So if you're trying to be purpose-driven, mission-driven, and promote a series of ideas or values, whether you have 3 employees or 3,000, that leadership, that flows top-down. The culture of the organization helps promote the brand of a business. And again, I think the feedback comes from your environment, from your clients, from social media, and you need to really be mindful of it. And if you have a strong mission statement and vision statement, which are purpose and value driven, then you need to have those checks and balances. Is what we're doing really working? Are we really serving the people that we meant to serve? Are we emphasizing, I should say, profit over value and service to others? These are the conversations you need to be having with yourselves to make sure that you're still on point.
Yes. Okay, so maybe we could illustrate this, okay? And Eva, I'm going to talk about this on the air, so don't forget about it. Eva is behind the scenes. She's putting up tweets as we're talking. And I've got a program that I do, and I needed to come up with a title for this program that I do. I do it in basically offsite 2-day retreats of any days of the week. And when somebody is doing this with me, one of the sections that we really talk about are customers. Who are our customers and who are not our customers? Okay, so I pulled this out to make a separate product, which is something that we're going to be launching soon. And I think it's really, I think it fits well here because we've got to understand the mentality of the people we're talking to. And I called it, customers are not always right, because they're not. And the thing is, we live in this society where everything is so positive. Everything is so, it's about the customers. The point was missed that while customers are the lifeline of the business, it's really about the right customers. It's not about the fact, and everybody can't be right. If they're trying to use the product wrong, there's nothing that we can do about that. We can help them get a better product to serve the problem that they're trying to solve. Yet, we look at, that means the customer's not right for us. And so we've got to take that in mind of how do we bring this into our business? How are we making sure our business is valuable and communicating in such a way that the people are using the product or the service the way that it was intended, right? And so here I am, I'm having a conversation. This happened to be on a walk I was on yesterday, different walk than the podcast walk. And what came up was, you know what? If we're looking at the way people perceive the world, and people only want to perceive things that are important to them. And I must stop here because the reason this is on my mind is there wasn't a lot of traction with the first name. As we started to promote it, we're not seeing the traction that we wanted. So I'm pondering this. And it occurred to me, I'm like, well, you know what? What if I said, and what if it was titled, Give the Right Customers Everything? And I was like, that's it, because it's the same thing. It's all about providing value to customers, having that open communication that customers have an expectation that they come to be a part of, and yet they're going to resonate with it on some deeper level. Instead of the naysayer model, they need the positive model. And already, and this is the part Eva's, I hope you're not cringing, Eva, because she and I haven't talked about this, and she's my project manager for everything. And that is that, I think we're going to rename this thing and we're going to try it this other way to get people the information they need about filtering out the wrong business so they have more of the right business coming to them, and recognizing it's okay to say no and how to say no without feeling like we're giving somebody this cold shoulder or slighting them. Isn't that interesting how all of those things have to come into play now more than ever before?
It's also interesting that I just trademarked give the right customers everything. So how
Shoot.
no, but in all seriousness, I think that's interesting, right? The focus from give the right customers everything as opposed to the customer is not always right or whatever it was
You got it. Yeah.
quite a difference the way not just in how it rolls off the tongue, but what you're interpreting, because we're not adding a negative valence to the customers. We're just basically saying not every customer is right, but the ones that are, we want to make sure that they truly derive the value that we're trying to give them.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that cool, huh?
I love it.
So this was a real life thing of something external to us that we're involved with, that we are a part of and we're standing beside and for and supporting, yet it's not reaching the people we want. And how can we change that? So it changes the way we identify and look at problems some.
Awesome.
How would you, knowing that you're a clinical psychologist, you may not have any, you may not have any examples, but I would be interested to know what you've observed in terms of fear and misunderstanding and anger, even around not having the right foundation of communication in place when it comes to interactions between companies and people and vice versa.
Well, I certainly, as a psychologist, can speak to the interpersonal communication.
Yeah, let's do that.
I mean, certainly one of the things that is important, and let's talk about, marriage and those sorts of relationships, is the other person needs to feel appreciated and heard. So if you are, and I love coming back to this because I think confirmation bias is something that we just overlook all the time, but it's everywhere. And it's kind of like the glasses. So Jess, you're wearing glasses, you put them on in the morning, you're conscious that the glasses go on. At 3:00 today, you're not going to go, you know what? I'm wearing glasses. You're not. They're just there. So and that's a great analogy for interpersonal relationships, because the way that we view the world, the lens, if you will, upon which we see things, it's there. And unless we actively take a step back to say, this is the way I'm viewing things, is this accurate or am I misinterpreting information? Then we can get ourselves into trouble. So you see it a lot. A great example, let's say that a couple is having a disagreement about how much time that they're spending together. The wife feels underappreciated and feels as though the husband doesn't spend as much time with her. So the husband decides that, you know what, I'm going to surprise her and I'm going to put in a little extra overtime at my job so I can earn some more money and take my wife to the mountains for the weekend. But what ends up happening is that her belief that he doesn't want to spend time with her is reinforced because she is interpreting the extra time away as proof positive that he is not interested. He doesn't, and then you can get crazy with paranoia and is somebody doing something else and blah, 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 blah. But the reality is we see things and we pull things from our environments that support our positions and our emotional beliefs. And when the positions we pull from cause us to experience negative emotional states, we become far less rational, and our communication and our relationships suffer drastically. And I have no idea if that answered your question at all, but it sounded reasonable coming off of my
Well, we can work with it.
Okay.
It was the right answer. And let's dig into that a little bit more, because it's amazing where we decide to take action and we forget to include other people in our choice. And so in a multi-person environment, whether it's a husband and a wife, whether it's a small office, whether it's a remote team, when we don't talk enough and we don't talk about the right stuff enough, we make assumptions. And I think assumptions are the bane of our existence, and they're the cause of all of our problems. Like, where did that come from? Why is it out of left field? And as leaders in business, as the roles we choose to lead, when we are making decisions, we're making these judgment calls. And when we've got this judgment call to make, we have to have incorporated all kinds of other feedback and data from a lot of different places for us to make that decision. And then it comes back to, do we believe in what we're doing? Can other people see it? And I can't remember if we were talking about limiting beliefs on or off the air now, but it was today. and where does that come up? Because when we second guess ourselves as leaders, other people will know. They might not know directly, but they're going to know in the level of service that they get, in the quality of the output of the product, in the way that customer service interacts with them, in the way that their boss talks to them, in the way that their employee presents information to the boss. Whatever interaction is happening, there is a responsibility of making sure we're all on the same page. And it takes effort. It takes effort to learn how to communicate in a way that, and I'm going to quote Scott now, because Scott and I had a program and he was talking about it, that you know what you want to say, you know the reasons that you want to say it, and you can say it in a way that the other person can understand, to open dialogue, to get to that common shared meaning. So if I were to ask you, Dr. Richard, what does shared meaning mean to you?
Shared meaning means to me that whatever the message is that an entity, be it a person or a brand, is trying to convey, that message is more or less universally felt and seen by people that experience it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I couldn't have said it better myself. There you have it, everybody. That's what shared meaning is. So how do we create it? That would be an interesting conversation. How do we create shared meaning between ourselves and others?
I can speak for myself personally. And again, for me, it's that my brand, the Daily Helping brand, is driven towards helping others. So in every action that I'm taking, in terms of finding the right type of guest for my show, I mean, I'm not just, I just don't interview anybody off the street because they're available. Like, that has to be some way I want my audience to be able to learn and grow from the people that come on my show. So for me, that shared meaning is, as the Daily Helping brand has grown, it's when people hear the Daily Helping, they associate it not necessarily with even a specific topic, because I have very different types of guests. It's that if I listen to this, I might pick up something. I often ask my guests, like, tell me your biggest helping, the one single most important thing that you want the listeners to take away with. That's it. If the audience takes away one piece of information that they can apply to their life and be more meaningful in their work, be happier in what they do, I've won. That's it. So that, for me, that's my shared meaning, is that I want everybody to be a part of this movement to help make the world a better place. So that's how I do it. But
I love it. And here's what I would say with your intention, about your intention, is that it is open for people to interpret. Some bring their own experiences and interpret their own way, knowing that the end goal of the Daily Helping is, how are we interacting and showing up for ourselves and for others in a positive way?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I intentionally have two components. One of the things I wanted to do was, of course, the mission, which we've talked about, but that's very vague, right? Like, there isn't, it's September 19th, and on September 23rd, I don't expect you to go online and say, oh, great news, Daily Helping goal achieved. I am the best version of Jess Dewell ever. That's it, right? It is an aspirational, non-quantifiable kind of thing, is that we're always striving to get better. So yes, there is a lot of personal application to that mission. Now, my show's movement, to get 1 million people to commit acts of kindness and post them on their social feeds using the hashtag #MyDailyHelping, that is very concrete, that is very quantifiable. and at a very different sort of proposition. So I think one has to be really clear as to, what they're trying to put out there. Are you putting out an idea? Is it, and again, like service-driven and product-driven things, they're total different animals altogether. Like
and then you have that hybrid, the service as products or software as a service, that whole SaaS model in the middle.
Right, right.
OMG, right?
Yeah, no, Satya Nadella at Microsoft really kind of changed the world when he, on that day when he said Microsoft is now a service company. Windows
That's
is
right.
a service, and people were jumping out of Windows, not understanding. But look, that's, I think, and not to derail us, but I think Microsoft is a brilliant example of shifting one's brand identity in this age, because Microsoft for decades was perceived as this megalomaniacal evil company, and licenses and per seat usage and this, that, and the other. And now they're giving everything away.
Right.
It's so different.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, top-down leadership that changed a culture.
That's the thing when we're talking about shared meaning. Somebody has to decide, right? There has to be a judgment about what does this mean? And then is it communicated in a way where the people who work with us, around us, that we serve, that buy from us, that support us, our vendors, all of these people have some inkling and understanding of what the organization is and who the people inside the organization are. Because we were talking about the lines non-existent, and this is where lines are blurring, because we do have a stake in the identity of the place we go to contribute every day. Whatever our job is, however we're making our money, we have that desire to contribute and to add something positive. And so while lasting change can only happen from the top down, that doesn't mean that we can't aspire to be our best selves every single day and decide what our values are, and the things that we don't understand at our work, the things that we don't understand about the products that we use, the bad experiences that we have. When we can bring an outside perspective to that, then we can better understand. And when we seek understanding, we have better communication, and we can decide, is this still right for me now? Is this still right for the company now? Is this still right for the movement now? I love everything you're saying.
I love everything you're saying. I was thinking to myself, what a great series of bumper stickers that would all just make. So.
Oh, I know, right? Yes. All right. So we're coming up toward the end of our show. And I wanted to ask you, now that we've had this big conversation, Dr. Richard, is there anything that has come up for you that you want to make sure and share around this topic, or a tangent, or just something fun in your life that this makes you think of?
I think what this makes me think of is that for me personally, I'm doing it right. And not to, right. Big thumbs up. No, and not to sound pompous at all, but again, like for me, my brand is my mission, and my mission is my brand. And I don't have that distinction. And depending on what you're putting out into the marketplace, that may be the same for you, and it may not be. One of the things that I do think is important is that we're in this era where it has never been easier to get your brand out there. Never. But it's also never been more difficult to stand out. And for those that work in corporations, it's also interesting because here we are, with LinkedIn and the social media. And so that's also becoming a really gray area and blurred lines, and becoming problems in corporations as well, because are you an employee? Are you the brand? When you're online, are you representing the brand? Are you representing yourself? It's very complex, but I think at the end of the day, if what you're doing is true to your core values, be it in your personal life or your professional life, you win.
You hear that, guys? When you do that, you win. You are listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. This is program 88, Personality Flaws of a Brand. And You can find all of the program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P88. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 88. Feel free to also search for Dr. Richard Schuster's name or the title of the show, Personality Flaws of a Brand. Don't forget, you're here, you're watching, you're listening, subscribe, get the next one delivered directly to your preferred listening platform. And at the website, you'll see all of your choices. This is a YouTube live stream that will turn into a podcast and be distributed out to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and more once we conclude the program. So here's the deal. Your experiences define what it means to be a leader today. It is bold to go after solutions, to take action, and to make decisions. We want to know, what have you... Oh, this is hilarious. I read the question wrong. I'm like, what? Here we go. When have you been a personality flaw to your brand?
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.
And that's the end.
We're out?
We're out.
Awesome. That was fun.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be fun. I didn't know what